Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here with a 10 cards 1 kit video featuring the Hero Arts February My Monthly Hero kit. And I'm going to start off by showing you what the contents of the kit were if you're unfamiliar, although I think that most people who are watching this probably have the kit and want some ideas of what to do with it. So the kit includes a little package of embellishments, including some blue and white vellum. This is a little bit different than the vellum you might be used to because the white is very opaque. They also have a little ink cube and a sponge. I've never used this type of sponge before, so I'm interested to see how that will go. And they don't give you a name for the ink cube color, so I don't know what it compares to in the Hero Arts collection. There's 2 glitter washi tapes. There's this stencil that also includes some masks. So besides getting the stencil images, you also get 3 cloud masks and the umbrella mask. You don't get masks for the other things inside of the stencil though. There's this silver thread, and I wasn't quite sure what I would use it for because the ends fray very easily, so I wasn't inclined to tie a bow with it. So I do come up with an idea later on in the video for it. So here you can see these vellum pieces. The blue is definitely more see-through, less opaque than the white. The white is almost not see-through at all, but it does have an interesting texture. And then they have these stamps and dies, and it's tied with a coordinating color of blue ribbon. So I kept that with my kit, thinking that perhaps I could use some of the ribbon as embellishment. I don't wind up using it in this video though, but I have it with the kit for future use. And there was also the backer paper of where the stamps and dies are, and I kept that, and I'm actually going to use that cloud background, and then on the back there's like a storm background. I'm going to use both those backgrounds kind of like pattern paper on my cards. So you can pull the stamp set right off of this backer, and then the stamp set has coordinating dies, which are on the reverse side, the storm side of this piece of cardstock. There's a couple of sentiments. They weren't really my favorite sentiments, to be honest. I don't find myself making a lot of cards for those type of occasions. It says, "Learn to dance in the rain. Without clouds there be no rainbows," and "May you weather this storm." So very encouraging sentiments. And then there are some extra dies on the back. So like I said, I'm going to be making 10 cards, so each card is going to go very, very quickly. And I've had to speed up the video quite a bit to fit it all in, and of course it's going to be a longer video because, even at 3 minutes a card, that goes out to 30 minutes. So for my first card, I am using a thick white card base. I use the 110-pound Recollections cardstock. I find it, much more economical and easy to find because I can just purchase it at Michael's. But something like Nina would be pretty similar. And I'm going to use a lot of white card bases and do a lot of clean and simple cards because this kit doesn't come with any pattern paper. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because I think that makes the kit more versatile and easier to use over and over again. Whereas if there's a lot of pattern paper, once you use up that pattern paper, you're done with the kit. When having stamps, stencils, ink, they are kind of always useful. So again, I'm just going to use a lot of the cardstock, white cardstock instead because I don't want to add too much extra to the kit, but I found it really hard to just make cards with just the contents of the kit. You definitely have to add black ink, or I feel like you do for sentiments, because just to use all the blue is a little too much for me. So I put the white cloud masks down with some removable adhesive, and then I am using that sponge to dab on some of the dye ink. And honestly, I really liked the way the sponge applied the ink. I thought it was a little bit better than like the Tim Holtz ink applicator because it just gives much softer edges even on this plain white cardstock. With the Tim Holtz tool, I find that I can't get soft blended edges on plain white cardstock, and I have to go with Bristol instead to get a better result. So I'm thinking that these sponges would be something that I might want to purchase an additional 1 or 2 of, because I found that you can sort of pinch it such that you can use a bunch of colors just with one sponge. So that was kind of nice too. And once I took the masks off, I was thinking about how I was going to add the sentiment or add some details, and I realized that I would like to stamp over them still because I wanted there to be some rain around the clouds to better fit with the sentiments. Something that I kind of I thought about as I was going through this kit was that I would have preferred to have not like, so the ink is blue, so blue skies, but yet all of the sentiments were about like rain and stormy weather for the most part. So I kind of wished I had like a gray to use for some of the backgrounds. However, of course, the blue works well for rain, so I kind of see, why they used it. But I definitely would have liked to mix in a gray, which of course you could if you have a gray ink. But again, I was just trying to see like what could I make if I tried to limit myself to the kit, at least on some cards, because there's other cards where, I definitely had to add some additional stuff to get 10 cards. And so I'm stamping the rain over the clouds. And I should have realized this at the time, but once it dries, you really won't see it because the ink that I'm stamping with is the same ink that I did the sponging on. However, towards the edges where it's a little bit softer, you can see it, so it winds up being an interesting detail. And then I stamped a sentiment on that as well. So for my next card, I went and I added some inks because if every single card was made with just blue ink, it just wouldn't work for me. And also there's a sentiment about rainbows. And so I wanted to be able to do some rainbow stamping to match that sentiment. So that's what I'm doing here. It said, without clouds, there'd be no rainbows. And so I kind of tried to be inspired by that sentiment. And I made some rainbow clouds. Again, I am going to use a white card base, a thick white card base, and I'm just using some other Hero Arts colors. Of course, you could just use whatever colors you have in the rainbow, but I figured, since it was a Hero Arts kit, I would just use my Hero Arts inks. And I am just doing some stamping with a stamp block. Of course, the stamp block isn't included with the kit, which makes sense because I think it's not really meant for like a beginner per se, I think it's just kind of meant to like supplement somebody who already stamps. And so I decided though, instead of using my MISTI, I just use a plain stamp block, kind of to show what you could accomplish without a MISTI. But then I wind up using my MISTI later, so, this is a really long process, and it was hard to stay consistent throughout the whole thing. As you notice though, when you are stamping with a block, sometimes like that green cloud, you see that there's a little bit of a mistake in it, like it's not quite evenly stamped. And so that would be one reason why you might want a tool like a stamp positioner from Fiskars or a MISTI or one of the other brands that are out there. But what I do recommend is if you want to get a better stamp, I find that if I hold the stamp to the paper longer, it gives it a little bit more time to absorb and I get a slightly better image than if I try to stamp quickly. And that probably makes sense if you think about it. The longer that you apply the ink, the more time it has to actually set in because dye ink does sink into the paper. And so I've stamped a little rainbow design across and then I'm going to stamp the sentiment. As a general rule for this set of 10 cards, I am going to use a VersaFine ink to stamp my sentiments because I really like how crisp and black it is. But I do want to point out at least once that it's a very sticky ink and it stays wet for a really long time, so be careful in terms of handling it. Like there when I was rounding the corners, if I touched that sentiment, it would definitely smear, and that's, you really want it to look nice and crisp on a clean and simple card like that. So for my next 2 cards, I want to do 2 versions of this card. I use the window die and I use the cat die, and I just cut them out of black cardstock so they look like a silhouette. And then, as I mentioned before, I wanted to use that backer that the dies and stamps came on because I thought it was such pretty cardstock, and I know that it was kind of just packaging and probably meant to be thrown away, but I thought, why not use it since I really liked the way it looked? So basically I trimmed out a piece that was about the size of the window, and I'm going to glue it to the back of the window so that it looks like you can see these skies through the black windows. So I'll do one as the storm and one as the sky, and even having used 2 rather large chunks, there is still a bit left in the pack, so I could use that for a further card. I will say this cardstock is a little bit slick, and so I wouldn't recommend stamping on it because I think that your ink would smear. You could of course use something like Stays-On, which does work well with slick cardstock, but just kind of something to think about. It's not pattern paper, it's not paper material, it has that coated feel. And then I'm going to add the cats in front of the windows as if they were kind of gazing out into the storm and into the sunny day. Since I don't want to stamp directly onto those backgrounds, I wanted to die cut a little panel to stick on the cards. And throughout this video, I'm going to be using my ATG gun for adhesive for the most part, except for when I need a specialty adhesive. And that's just because I find it to be the most economical way to purchase adhesive. You know, kind of you cost out the square footage, not square footage, square inchage? I don't know. Basically the length of the tape. It's, you know, winds up being the cheapest and it's readily available, and then you don't have to keep getting those little plastic pieces. There's a little bit less waste involved. So, like I said, I wanted to put a sentiment panel. I thought about stamping it. It doesn't really fit in the windows. It's slick cardstock. I don't really want to stamp it just underneath because then I feel like it'd be a little unbalanced. But I was trying some different ideas because I didn't want to try to add another thing to the kit. But I found that I really just wanted a sort of generic shape panel for this and for some of the other sentiments. So I am adding, and I'm using the Spellbinder set of dies. So I'm using a small one here and I'll use a larger one later. There are some add-ons for the kits, and those include some layering dies, so you can certainly check them out because I'll leave a link to the Hero Arts, you know, My Monthly Hero page, but this kit is sold out, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But I just wanted to also show that you could similarly use the blue ink to color your cardstock, and in this case I did it with the sponge to just make it a little bit lighter. However, you could also just bring your ink pad to the cardstock and swipe it across, and that would create a blue color. So I'm going to again stamp my sentiment. I'm choosing to pop it up. I don't know why I put foam tape on it first. It's not generally a good idea because then you kind of have an uneven surface. So I definitely recommend stamping your sentiment first. However, your sentiment will be wet then, so maybe that's what I was thinking, that like I didn't want to turn it over and smear it. So I'm going to use two different sentiments. I'm using the May You Weather This Storm for the stormy background, and then there would be no clouds, without clouds there'd be no rainbows, that other sentiment for the sort of sunny day, since it had those a bunch of different colors in the sky. I did definitely feel limited by these sentiments. I kind of wanted to add another stamp set to add more sentiments, but again, I was trying to stick more to the kit. So for my next card, I decided that I would start using the stamp set a little bit more, and I was going to want to cut out the it's a little girl with a umbrella, and she was one of my favorite stamps, so I'm going to be using that soon. But here I'm just creating a background. I'm trying to use this blue ink a couple of different ways, a couple of different times, just to kind of show you some different ideas for what it can do. However, it is so light it doesn't really show up on the camera, so even though I'm covering most of this front piece of cardstock with the blue raindrops, you can actually hardly see them on camera, but in real life they're pretty visible. And so I have just kind of stamped it 4 times, slightly overlapping, and then I'm going to move on with the rest of my design. I wanted to again, as I said, add that little girl and some clouds. So I'm going to take another piece of white cardstock and stamp them down. I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring on the little girl, so I want to use a Copic friendly ink. And here I am using my Misty because I wanted to make sure I got a solid impression with these, but again, you really don't have to, and it probably would have been smarter to avoid that because I know not everybody has a similar tool. But I'm going to stamp the clouds and the little girl. And I'm using My Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink because it will be Copic safe, and since I'm using it for one, I'm just going to use it for both. It also dries a little bit faster than the VersaFine, so since I will be using the coordinating dies to cut these out, I wouldn't want them to be wet as I run them through my die cutting machine because it wouldn't smear. So I'll just line up the dies. I did notice with the Hero Arts dies that there's quite a bit of a white border around them, which is not a problem, but it was just something a little bit different for me because most stamp sets trim a little bit closer. It's barely noticeable though. So I am going to go around and use some Copic colors in a rainbow. I realized that there are 8 pieces of this, and so it doesn't fit a rainbow perfectly, so I decided to stretch some of the colors by using, like in this instance, 2 different oranges, and then I think I do 2 different greens, so that it still generally looks like a rainbow, but accommodates the 8 colors. And on the umbrella itself, I'm actually not even doing any shading. I'm not going to bother to mention the Copic colors because they're used in such small amounts and there's no real blending, so I just recommend using whatever marker you have, whatever color you have. Just, pick any old green that looks good with, what the other colors that you're using, because it doesn't matter. And so I did do, like I said, just a tiny bit of shading on the raincoat because there was a little bit more space there. And then later in the video, I'm going to recolor this image again for a different card with a slightly different look. And there is enough space for a bit of shading, but I'd probably recommend like 2 colors at most, unless you like to get really fussy with your coloring. And I popped these both up on some foam tape, and I'm going to put the clouds higher up where the rain ends, because like I said, I didn't cover the entire piece of cardstock with the rain, just sort of the middle portion. And so I make sure those clouds are above all of the rain, and then my little girl is at the bottom where the rain ends at her feet. And you could add a little bit of shadow under her if you feel confident doing that. I use something like usually like a C00 or a W00 for something like that, but I was trying to keep these nice and simple. So for my next card, I used some of that vellum, and it was a little bit different than the vellum that I'm used to, as I mentioned before, because it's really opaque, but it is see-through enough that if you added adhesive to it, you'd still see the adhesive through it. So one way that I approach vellum when I don't want to see the adhesive, or, well, I actually cover it completely with adhesive, so rather than seeing a little bit of adhesive, the whole thing is covered with adhesive so you can see all of it. And so since it all looks the same, it's not in a distracting way. And so I completely covered that strip of vellum with a large piece of Elizabeth Crafts tape, and then I die cut 2 of the different clouds from the stamp set, or sorry, from the die set, out of that vellum, and I just have like a whole pile of clouds, and I don't even wind up using them all, but I figured just cut a whole bunch because I was trying to make 10 cards and I might come up with a use for them later. Then I taped down the stencil with some delicate surface frog painter's tape so that it will not pull up my card, and I am sponging this blue ink through the raindrop part of the stencil. And I'm going to kind of do a similar thing that I did in the last card where I had added the clouds at the top of the rain, but this time I'm using the rain stencil as opposed to the rain stamp. As the stencil is of course much larger and kind of about the size to cover the front of the card. However, if you wanted to cover the card completely, you could continue to stencil and layer the stencil on, similar to what I had done with the stamp in the past card. And so now I'm going to sort of just think about how I might layer these clouds together. You will see a little bit of the blue rain through the clouds. So if you prefer not to see that, you might want to lay yours down a little bit more carefully so they kind of match up exactly. I was kind of okay with seeing it through some of it. And I'm just going to layer on an odd number of clouds, as things generally tend to look good in odd numbers, and try to sort of fill the top without making it too overwhelming. Or, I think I did 3 of each, so rather than like odds. I'm sorry, it's a lot to remember. Okay, so there's 7 clouds in all, so I kind of made it. And then I'm going to add the sentiment, once again, the may you weather this storm. So I'm going to have lots of encouragement cards at the end of this, and I'm going to try to just put it a little bit off to the side so that it's barely overlapping, if at all. And I decided that once I had that sentiment down, I felt like the bottom left-hand corner was a little bit blank. And also, at this point, I had made a few cards, but hadn't used this washi at all. And I was trying to think of different ways that I could use the washi with everything else that was going on in this kit. And I don't know, I just was having a hard time matching it up with some of the other elements of the kit. So I wound up barely using any washi. I think that this is the only time in all 10 cards that I even use any of the washi tape. I was a little bit worried that it wouldn't stick because sometimes the washi glitter tape that I've used in the past hasn't been as sticky, and also I didn't think it would stick to each other, so it wouldn't be able to layer it as well, which, you know, you can definitely do with most washi tape. Layering it works really nicely. So I tried not to overlap them too much so that wouldn't be a problem, but I did find that generally this tape was pretty sticky and it added a little bit of extra emphasis to the bottom there. I did think it would be fun to somehow figure out how to use the washi at the edge of the cloud for like silver lining, but I never quite figured that out. So here I have a piece of the blue vellum, and this is where I was going to incorporate that string. I have seen a couple of different YouTubers use the string as like an embellishment in the background, where they just sort of like make a gathering of string, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second here, but Julie Ebersol does it, and it looks really pretty, but I don't usually like to make a lot of dimensional cards, so I don't find myself doing it that often, but I decided to give it a shot. So I laid down the vellum with just one single piece of tape in the center because I knew that would be covered with the panel that you see off to the left there. Then I put down some more adhesive on top of it. In this case, I'm using the Elizabeth Crafts tape that I used for the back of the other vellum. However, you could use any adhesive you want because you're not going to see this, so it doesn't matter. And now I'm just sort of bringing the string around in like this loose clump of, really, it just looks super, super messy, and that's all it is. It's like this, just literally a clump of string, knowing that some of it's going to stick out the edge, so sometimes I just put the panel on top of it, kind of see what is it going to look like in the end, maybe make some adjustments, pull some string around a bit, but once I kind of have it shaped in a way that's visually appealing, I am going to move on with the card and create this panel that's going to cover all of that mess in the center and all of the adhesive that stuck the blue vellum down. And at first I thought that I would stamp my images directly onto my panel, but I thought, well, I have coordinating dies, so may as well use them. I don't actually typically buy coordinating dies because they're so expensive, and sometimes I don't use a stamp set that often, so it's just better for me to fussy cut it out the handful of times that I'm going to use it. If I have a stamp set that I really, really love and get a lot of use out of, that's different. I'll tend to, buy the coordinating dies. But since they came in the kit, I said, might as well use them. So I'm going to instead create a colored background, and then I will put the elements on top. But you did see there in the Misty, what I was doing was just making sure that all of the elements would fit onto the panel. So even though I didn't stamp them there, I just sort of lined them up to make sure it would work. And I'll be doing the stamping on it later. I'm again using that blue color to create the sky, and then I'm adding the same green that I did on the rainbow card to the bottom for some grass here. As mentioned before, it's just really tough to only use one color of ink the whole time and create some interesting scenes. Although if you wanted to instead of pulling in another ink color, you could be using the Copic markers to create the grass instead, and that would actually look really nice and have some texture. So I stamped the sentiment towards the bottom because, like I said, I already kind of lined it up and made sure it all fit, and it's again that rainbow sentiment, but this time I'm actually going to be stamping the rainbow image itself. I think this little rainbow is really cute, but I did notice that it doesn't actually have enough slots for all the colors of the rainbow, so I just kind of left out purple at the bottom of the rainbow. And here, as I mentioned before, you can get a little bit of shading on your umbrella if you want. So I took two colors, I think it was R27 and R17, but really any two similar colors would work well. I decided, since I wanted the rainbow to pop a little bit, rather than doing a rainbow on the umbrella again, I would keep the rainbow to just the literal rainbow. And then for the little girl image, I would just use the primary colors. And so I'm going to hold those same primary color markers to the side and use those in my rainbow, but I am using two yellows and 2 blues and 2 reds to create just a little bit of shading on the girl. Even on her teeny tiny boots there, I did use 2 blended out colors. You can blend in small spaces, but it's just not something I normally bother to do because it becomes like barely noticeable. And so I also use a flesh color for her legs. Any flesh tone you have, the E's are what I usually use. E00 or E11 makes a good Caucasian flesh tone. And so like I said, I'm going to pull those same 3 colors in for stripes on the rainbow so that it coordinates well. And then I'm going to pull in 2 additional colors, an orange and a green, in the same sort of bright tone. And I'm not going to do any shading on the rainbow. Of course, you could do some shading on the rainbow by using 2 colors on each, but they are really thin. And I find that when you're working in thin spaces like that, if you really want to use a light touch, and if you're not so good at using that, then you probably don't want to fuss with too much ink, because the more ink you add, the more likely it is to bleed. And so then I'm going to adhere both of these down. I'm going to glue them flat because I will be popping up this panel and I don't want there to be too many layers. However, I do think that it's important to pop up this panel, because if you were to try to glue it flat on top of all that string, it would look kind of lumpy. And so essentially the foam tape is going to help sort of flatten that out and prevent it from looking lumpy. And so what I'm going to do is take some foam tape and I'm going to put it in between the little bits of string, because if you put it too much on top of the string, it'll get lumpy again, which is like the whole point of adding this, is so that it isn't. So I'm just tearing up little tiny pieces of foam tape and sort of layering them together in the area of the card that this panel is going to go over, and position it down, and this card is finished. That was definitely one of my more complicated and time-consuming cards, and I really like the way that it turned out. But trying to get 10 cards done as I got towards the end, I was starting to try to think of some simpler cards for sure. I wanted to use the boots because there is that sentiment, learn to dance in the rain, and I was having a hard time figuring out what I wanted to pair it with, because it didn't really seem to go with like the little girl's not dancing. She's just standing there, and so trying to figure out like what does it match with, and I thought the boots would be fun. And so I'm going to use the same sort of yellow and red tones that I used on her umbrella to create some stenciled on boots here. Again, this is why I had such a hard time incorporating or trying to just use the kit, because when you have a stencil, for me anyway, I want to add like a bunch of different fun mediums and inks through it. And so I again pulled in some other colors of ink. They do happen to be the same red and yellow that I used on the rainbow card, so I'm trying to pull in those colors continuously. Like once I use it on one card, continue to use it a couple more times so that at least my supplies are a bit more consistent. But I did 3 yellow and 2 red rain boots. You definitely want to be careful as you apply the ink. That's where I see I put down a lot of the tape around them so that you only are getting the rain boots, since there are so many images on the stencil. However, if you do get a little bit of extra ink where you don't want it, you can use a Tombow Mono sand eraser that's specifically for ink, and it will get a little bit of ink off of your card by basically just acting as sandpaper. And so I had to do that. You can see right there that sort of swift motion that I'm doing. You can barely see it in my hand, but that was the Tombow eraser, and I was just trying to pick up a touch of yellow ink that got where I didn't want it to go. And then I am taking the blue ink from the kit and I am stamping some raindrops all around these rain boots. I try to sort of make the rain boots look like they were somewhere up and somewhere down, kind of mimic the idea of dancing and tie in that sentiment a bit more. And at first I thought I would just do them in like a strip along where the boots were, but eventually I decided to cover the entire piece with the raindrops, which wound up taking quite a while, but since I hadn't used that little raindrop stamp yet, I thought it wound up being a good little use for it and helped me to incorporate more of that blue ink into it again. And this is actually the only card where I wind up using that learn to dance in the rain sentiment. I probably should have looked around a bit more to try to get some different ideas for how people use the kit. However, I found that a lot of people used add-ons with it, and I just didn't want to. I wanted to just use the pure kit. And so since so many people use sentiments with the add-ons, even the few ideas that I did look up, they were pretty much all not as useful because of that. So next card, I am again trying to figure out how to incorporate this white vellum, and it was like a fun way to use it. I think it would look really cool in the window die, so that would be another way to use it, and I didn't use it that way in any of the cards in this video, but again, that would be probably another interesting way to use it, but then it would look kind of like frosted glass, so I don't know. So I'm going to stamp the blue ink in the raindrops all over this background because I wanted to use that rainbow again. I love rainbows, and so I wanted to make sure I use that rainbow stamp a couple of times. And so I wasn't quite sure how this dye ink would dry on the vellum because in past experience with vellum, it tends to be a bit waxy, and so dye ink doesn't dry the best on it. However, this more opaque vellum was also not as shiny, didn't feel coated or waxy or anything like that. And I found that actually the dye ink dried a lot better on it than traditional vellum, so that was one advantage, because I kind of feel like I was like poo-pooing it before, like saying, oh, it's not as good as regular vellum, but there's things that it can do that regular vellum can't, so, that adds some, pluses for it or whatever. So I also stamped the sentiment, and I'm going to make sure that I give it probably plenty of time to dry, because it's that wet, sticky pigment ink again. Once I had that panel created, I colored the rainbows. I didn't show it because I colored them the same way I did last time, just plain colors. Die cut them out, used a little bit of adhesive to stick them down, and then when I go to glue this vellum panel onto my white card base, the only place that I'm going to put adhesive is right behind those rainbows. So it might not be very, very secure to the card base, but it is enough, especially if you're using a really strong adhesive like the ATG. The Elizabeth Crafts adhesive that I've used in parts of the video too is also a really strong adhesive, so I recommend that one as well. But again, just add the adhesive underneath the rainbows because otherwise you will see it through the vellum as it is still, semi-translucent. So we are finally on to the last card if anyone has been keeping count so far. And as I mentioned, I'm like a little bit running out of ideas because I did record this all in one day or all in one weekend, and I was like getting to the point where I was like, I don't even know what else to do with this kit. But I came up with one last design, again trying to stick to mostly the supplies that are in the kit. And I'm stamping with this blue ink again, so it's going to be really hard to see. But I'm taking this sort of windy looking cloud that has lots of swirls in it, and one of the things about the stamp set that I thought was really cute was these little faces for the clouds. And it looks like basically there's like a face with big puffy cheeks as if the cloud is blowing wind. And I really liked that and wanted to make sure that I used it before I was done with my set of 10 cards. So that's the card that I'm using. This is the card that I'm using it on. So just the first cloud I stamped has that face and some wind lines coming out of it. All the other clouds are just plain. And then I'm going to also stamp an umbrella, so it looks like that cloud is blowing the umbrella. And so those like windswept lines are coming out of the cloud, but also behind the umbrella, so it looks like the wind is pushing the umbrella. And again, I'm going to use that May You Weather This Storm sentiment. And once I had all that down, and I did incorporate a gray ink for this one, I didn't have a Hero Arts gray to use, so I wound up with a Memento gray. I'm going to continue to fill in the cloud so that the entire background is covered with clouds or the sentiment and umbrella situation. And I'm going to add a little bit of Copic marker detail This is directly onto the card base, and so the Copic marker is probably going to bleed through to the inside, which I'm fine with, but if you don't like the look of that, you could put this on a panel and then put it on top of your card base, or on the inside of your card, you could put like a white liner to kind of cover up the area where the marker is. But I'm going to take a really light blue marker. I think it's like a B12 or B02, something like really, really light. And I add a little bit of detail to the clouds and to the umbrella. So I just kind of swept along the bottom of the clouds, and you'll see me start that in a second. Right now I'm using the, I think it's a C00 to again add a little bit of detail to the clouds, make them stand out a bit more because it is so light. And again, in the photos at the end, you'll see that the clouds are more clear than they are in the video. Something about the lighting in the video makes it really hard to see that light ink, but in real life it's not nearly as light as that. But I put on the blue, I blend it out a little bit with the 0 marker, just so that there's a little bit of interest in detail, since it is such a clean and simple card with such light colors. It adds just a little bit more weight to everything that's going on. And then I added a second little bit of the wind-blown look to fill in that space. So that was all of my 10 cards. 10 different things you can do with this Hero Arts kit. And this is, I'm showing you what I have left. I still have almost all of the silver and washi because I barely used it. I have a full sheet of the blue and the white vellum because again, it wasn't something that I found myself using a lot. And then I have like actually a sheet and a half of the blue. You can see there's a little bit extra there of the blue. But then I have all of the dies, all of the stamps, all of the stencil, because those are things that you don't use up no matter how many cards you make. And so after having made 10 cards with the kit, honestly, I'm pretty ready to kind of pass it along. So I know that the kit is sold out. However, I know that there's probably some people who really wanted the kit and didn't get a chance to purchase it. So I am offering my slightly used kit, which is, not really missing any contents, to anyone who's interested in purchasing it. So if you think that you would like to purchase what's left of my kit, which is, like I said, most of it, I'm thinking about $30 with shipping for the kit. You can email me at hello@jesscrafts.com, and I'll get back with you trying to figure out how to purchase it. Shipping might be a little bit more, though, if you're outside the US, so just let me know. That is it for my cards and video today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see future videos of the Hero Arts kits, as I am currently subscribed, so I can, make one with the next kit that I receive. You can find some links to Hero Arts in the video description below, as well as to my blog and social media and etc. etc. Thanks for watching. Bye.